So this next question is asking about how do you effectively communicate with your patent examiner. The examiner is the one that works for the government, works at the patent offices, and is this gatekeeper trying to decide whether or not your patent should be allowed to issue. So they'll let it through the gate, or maybe you have to tweak it a little bit, or maybe it's never going to get through, right? So when it comes to communication, I want to talk to that examiner as much as possible. So by right, you're allowed to have one interview with the examiner. And they have an AIR form, A-I-R, I forget what that stands for. You can Google it. But you can fill out this form and you can request an interview. You have to give them more than a week's notice. And or you can simply call them up, right? Is when they give you that office action, they provide their phone number and you can arrange a time. And then typically you'll put together an interview agenda that will maybe talk about the amendment or lay out a little bit on the arguments. You can do those in many different ways. I keep mine very short. A little bit of amendment, sentence or two on why I think it's different. There are different schools of thought there. I have colleagues that I've worked with at prior firms where they'll do a big, long dissertation on all the issues. I don't do that. My philosophy is that the examiners are very busy and they're never going to read it. So I try and persuasive communication is always brief and direct and to the point, perhaps repetitive. Keep repeating things. Keep repeating things, keep repeating things. So when you get an office action, so many people just simply respond on paper. And as it turns out, paper is not a very good communication mechanism, especially when you're talking about technical things and maybe the patent examiners there are not lawyers typically. It's a bad way to communicate. So you certainly have to do a paper response if you can't get the examiner to agree to allow it by talking to them. But I'll talk to them. So you can set up a phone conversation. You can set up a video conference, right? You can share a screen. Typically, you can maybe show them if you have a prototype or something. It's really valuable to show them how it works. That interview gives you the opportunity to lay down a lot of context that perhaps wasn't in the patent application. These examiners often have never worked in industry, and they may not be very familiar with how it really works. And they really appreciate having you explain and give the background and maybe show them a demo of what's going on. You used to be able to do them in person. Post-COVID, I don't think they've opened them up to do them in person. That was my preferred way of doing things. But video works very, very well. Phone calls, I have very good luck with phone calls too. Communicate with them so you can have this meeting of the minds. Is you have to understand how the examiner perceives the problem and the rejection. And only after you understand it from their perspective are you going to have much success in coming up with the fix, either an amendment, an argument, or just an argument. You have to understand where they're coming from. But they may not be that good at explaining exactly what it is, and especially explaining what the underlying issues are. And sometimes there are things that they would never put in writing. It's an emotional thing. I'm terrified to issue this patent because it just looks too broad. I've had examiners tell me that, or my boss will never sign off on this, and they need if they're junior, they need to have their supervisor sign off on things, and that's something they would never put in writing. But you can have that conversation. So, every case, every office action, I will talk to the examiner. And sometimes I'll even say to the examiner, it's like, look, this is, I'm going to call you up. If we can't figure this thing out, so that I can get through the gate, or you can convince me to abandon this case, we're going to be talking every 3 to 6 months. And I get paid to do it. I'm happy to do it. You may not like doing it, but there's something about that face-to-face interaction that conveys meaning in a way that it doesn't on paper, and is easier for everybody involved. So for me, it's the only way I'll operate. It's the only way I'll operate. As I do very little correspondence on paper. You're required to each round. But often my responses are very short. They're a page that says, as we discussed in the interview, blah, 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 right? And I have 2 or 3 sentences there, and that's it. Sometimes it's just a half a sentence. I just filed a response today, and it was all boiler. There was an amendment that was very thoughtful and that sort of thing that I had run past the examiner. In fact, the examiner suggested the amendment. Okay, now I know what you want. I'd put that in there, and I just said, as we discussed in the interview, the above amendment overcomes the art of record. That's probably one of 3 custom sentences that I'll put in most office actions, but my effort is limited to 3 sentences typically, because I'm doing all of the heavy lifting in that conversation. Another thing that you'll get is sometimes I had a colleague like this was 20 years ago, and he really wanted to be a litigator, loved to fight. So he'd get those examiners on the phone, and he'd be very adversarial and mean and shouting, and literally shouting. And you got to remember, on the other side, it's a human. And the way that I see it, you certainly have to be respectful. They work for the government. They really have almost sole discretion. It's not technically true, but it's one of those 98% true things. Sole discretion to torpedo your case or make it easy. So I choose the easy route. Is the conversation I had with the examiner yesterday, I said, look, we're both on the same side, right? This isn't adversarial. You don't want to issue a patent that's overly broad, and I don't want one because I can't enforce it, right? So we're on the same side. Let's figure out what that is, right? This isn't an argument. This is just roll up your sleeves and let's figure it out. And, almost always after an interview, I'm getting that case allowed, because we roll up our sleeves, we figure it out, we'll go back and forth a little bit, and on paper, the back and forth would be another round of argument. And each round of argument, you hiring your outside counsel are going to pay $3,000 to $5,000 per round. So me, with my practice, I average less than 1 round of argument to allowance in most cases. So I end up being cheaper than anybody, because the average is around 3 to 4 rounds. So we like to write a great patent application, and then I say hand walk it through the patent office, because I take it right to the examiner and talk to the examiner about it, rather than having this back and forth paper chase. So talk to your examiners. Your examiner is another person just like you. Also, size up your examiner. The TIP tool has an examiner report. It'll give you some statistics on the examiner that's been assigned to your case. And you can additionally get the examiner analytics module. That'll give you more detailed analytics on your examiner. And you can get an idea, right? As I met an examiner, 3689, I think was her art unit, Janice Mooneyham. She had allowed just 2 or 3 cases in 20 years at the office. And she bragged about that to me. Nice gal, but vicious, absolutely vicious. And certainly if you're trying to get a patent, good luck to you. So know that, because you treat that situation differently than the examiner that's been doing it a long time and has a 90% allowance rate. It's just a different conversation, and you have to approach it differently, and your preparation might be different. So know who you're dealing with, and be respectful, and try and figure out what their thought process is all about. So I hope that helps, answers your question. If you have any further questions or comments, you can leave them below. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we'll talk to you next time.